Really don't know. The business is fickle. I hope to do more.
Martin Lawrence is the guy that showed everybody you can make it from D.C. to Hollywood.
For 30 years, Martin Lawrence made us laugh until our sides hurt. But behind the jokes, the pratfalls, and that infectious grin was a man fighting demons that Hollywood didn't want you to see. At 60 years old, the truth about Martin's darkest chapter is finally coming to light, and it's more disturbing than anything he ever put on screen. Picture this: May 8, 1996. One of America's biggest comedy stars is found running into traffic on Ventura Boulevard, screaming, "Fight the establishment," at oncoming cars while carrying a loaded .38 firearm. This wasn't a movie scene or a publicity stunt. This was Martin Lawrence having a complete mental breakdown in broad daylight, and it was just the beginning. What followed was a spiral of G arrests, death threats against his own wife, SH lawsuits that ended his hit TV show, and a near-fatal coma that doctors said should have eliminated him. But here's what's really shocking. Hollywood covered it all up, enabled his self-destruction, and kept the money machine rolling while Martin was literally dying. Dave Chappelle tried to warn us back in 2006 when he asked the question that nobody wanted to answer. Now, nearly 2 decades later, we finally have the answer. This isn't just another celebrity scandal story. This is the untold truth about how the entertainment industry chews up its biggest stars and spits them out, and how Martin Lawrence somehow survived what should have destroyed him completely. The man who made us laugh was screaming for help the entire time, and we were too busy laughing to notice. 3 months after his Ventura Boulevard breakdown, Martin Lawrence proved that his first arrest wasn't just a one-time mental health crisis. It was the beginning of a pattern that would reveal something much darker. A man so consumed by fear that he couldn't leave home without a weapon. July 29, 1996, Burbank Airport. Martin Lawrence is trying to catch a Southwest Airlines flight to Phoenix, probably thinking he's put his May breakdown behind him. Then airport security runs his luggage through the X-ray machine, and suddenly alarms are going off everywhere. Inside Martin's suitcase, a loaded 9mm semi-automatic firearm. When airport police confronted him, Martin's response was almost childlike in its naivety. He claimed that he thought it was perfectly legal to carry a loaded firearm in his luggage as long as he was traveling out of state. Think about that for a second. This is a man who'd just been arrested 3 months earlier for carrying a firearm during a mental breakdown, and he genuinely believed he could pack heat for a casual trip to Arizona. Airport Sergeant Tom Davenport described Martin as extremely cooperative and nice during the arrest, which makes the whole situation even more disturbing. This wasn't some gangster trying to intimidate people. This was a scared man who'd convinced himself that carrying weapons was normal, necessary behavior.
Sir, we just want to talk. You want to talk? Well, go ahead. We're not immigration. They can't hear you because they're still shooting.
But here's what nobody was talking about at the time. Why did Martin Lawrence feel the need to be armed everywhere he went? What was he so afraid of that he'd risk his career, his freedom, and his life by constantly carrying G's? The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. May 1996, a breakdown with a .38 firearm. July 1996, airport arrest with a 9mm. And sandwiched between these incidents was something even more chilling. His wife Patricia had started documenting his increasingly erratic and threatening behavior. This wasn't just about weapons. This was about a man whose grip on reality was slipping so badly that he'd turned weapons into security blankets. The same guy who made us laugh with his physical comedy was now so paranoid that he couldn't function without being armed and dangerous. What makes this even more tragic is that Martin's weapon obsession was happening during the absolute peak of his career. Martin was dominating Thursday night television. Bad Boys had established him as a legitimate movie star. He was making millions, living the dream. So what was driving him to carry loaded weapons like he was expecting a war? The answer would come later, when his wife's restraining order revealed the full scope of his paranoia. But even then, nobody understood that Martin's firearm arrests weren't just about poor judgment. They were desperate attempts to protect himself from threats that may have been very real. Because in Hollywood, sometimes the people who seem the most paranoid are actually the most aware of what's really happening behind the scenes. While Martin was getting arrested for carrying weapons in public, behind closed doors he was making threats that would terrify the woman who was supposed to be the love of his life. What Patricia Southall revealed in court documents would expose a side of Martin Lawrence that no comedy routine could ever mask. January 7, 1995. The Norfolk Waterside Marriott Hotel. 600 guests watch Martin Lawrence marry Miss Virginia, USA, Patricia Southall, in what looked like a fairy tale wedding. The photos show a beaming couple. Martin in his tuxedo, looking every bit the successful comedian. Patricia radiant in her wedding dress. 20 months later, Patricia would be hiding in a hotel room with her infant daughter, terrified that her husband might actually eliminate her. The marriage started falling apart almost immediately, but the real horror began during the filming of A Thin Line Between Love and Hate in July 1995.
Man, that'd be a good ass movie. If a woman wanted to get back at her man or whatever, something like that. And then I just went.
Patricia later described finding Martin wandering the streets in his pajamas, muttering incoherently about going to a surprise party for himself at the Hard Rock Cafe. This wasn't quirky comedian behavior. This was a man losing his grip on reality. But the wandering was nothing compared to what came next. According to Patricia's court filings, Martin had undergone psychiatric treatment since July 1995 and had been taking psychotropic medication. Think about that timeline. His mental health crisis started a full year before his public breakdown on Ventura Boulevard. By September 1996, Patricia had seen enough. She filed for a restraining order that would reveal the true extent of Martin's deterioration. In sworn court documents, she accused him of threatening to delete her and her family. Not hurt them, not scare them, delete them. But the thing is, Martin has been really family-oriented since the beginning of his career, and he had no plans of alienating his family. However, the details Patricia provided paint a picture of a man consumed by paranoia and rage. She described how Martin would wake her up in the middle of the night, pick fights, and then physically shove her. She was living in constant fear, never knowing when his mood would shift from loving husband to violent threat. What makes this even more disturbing is that Martin had a full-time live-in nurse since May 1996. His wife was so afraid of him that she needed medical supervision just to be in the same house. Psychiatric testing in September 1996 found impairment in his thought processes. Official confirmation that something was seriously wrong with Martin's mental state. Patricia's most chilling revelation was about Martin's daily habits. While he only drank occasionally, she said he was smoking substances every day, which caused him to speak irrationally, combined with his refusal to take prescribed medication. This created a perfect storm of instability that made him dangerous to everyone around him. The breaking point came in mid-September 1996. Patricia described how Martin woke her up, started a fight, and then physically attacked her. Fearing for her life, and that of their infant daughter Jasmine, Patricia grabbed the baby and fled to a hotel in Universal City. Years later, Patricia would tell Dr. Phil, "I had nothing. I was ashamed, embarrassed. I was a mess." This wasn't just about a failed marriage. This was about a woman who'd been terrorized by someone the world saw as a lovable comedian. But here's what's really disturbing about this story. While Patricia was living in fear, Martin was still filming movies, still doing interviews, still making millions of dollars. Hollywood knew he was dangerous enough to require psychiatric supervision and medication, but they kept the cameras rolling anyway. Here's the part that nobody wanted to acknowledge at the time. The entertainment industry itself was feeding Martin's deterioration. The relentless pressure of maintaining his public persona, meeting grueling production schedules, and navigating the complex politics of Hollywood had created a pressure cooker environment that was literally driving him insane. Yet no one in the industry seemed willing or able to connect the dots between his erratic behavior and the systemic stress he was under.
I don't know if there's anything I would change because it's been a great career, man. I've gotten to do things I never thought I'd be able to do, see and go places I never thought I'd be able to go, so I don't know.
Martin was at the peak of his career when his breakdown began, starring in blockbuster films, headlining his own TV show, and carrying the expectations of an entire network on his shoulders. The stress of being on 24/7 combined with the industry's notorious disregard for mental health in the 1990s created the perfect storm for psychological collapse. But instead of recognizing these warning signs as symptoms of an industry problem, Hollywood treated them as personal failings. Producers and studios prioritized profits over well-being, often enabling Martin's self-destructive tendencies by keeping him working despite clear signs of distress. They saw the psychiatric treatment, the medication, the live-in nurse, all red flags that screamed This man needs help, but as long as he could still deliver laughs and box office returns, they looked the other way. But Martin Lawrence wasn't the only comedy genius being driven to the brink. Just 9 years later, another comedian would flee Hollywood under eerily similar circumstances. And this time, he would speak the truth that Martin couldn't. May 2005, Dave Chappelle, at the absolute peak of his career, walked away from a $50 million Comedy Central deal and disappeared to South Africa. Sound familiar? Just like Martin Lawrence in 1996, Chappelle was immediately labeled crazy by the media machine. Just like Martin, he was at the height of his success when he broke. And just like Martin, the industry's response was to suggest that he needed psychiatric medication.
What's going on? Why is Dave Chappelle going to Africa? Why does Mariah Carey make a $100 million deal and take her clothes off on TRL? A weak person cannot get to sit here and talk to you. Ain't no weak people talking to you. So what is happening in Hollywood?
The parallels are chilling. Chappelle later revealed that when he decided to leave his show, other people were trying to get him to take psychotic medication. Think about that. Here's a man making rational business decisions about his own career, and suddenly everyone around him is pushing psychiatric Ds. Where have we heard this story before? In his explosive 2006 interview with Oprah Winfrey, Chappelle dropped bombshells that should have connected every dot about what happened to Martin Lawrence. Dave allegedly admitted to close sources, saying, "I felt in a lot of instances I was deliberately being put through stress because when you're a guy who generates money, people have a vested interest in controlling you." This wasn't just about creative differences. This was about systematic psychological manipulation. But Chappelle went even further, revealing the industry's most sinister tactic. He described how Hollywood executives would convince successful black entertainers that they were losing their minds, then offer psychiatric treatment as the solution. Dave claimed that the industry actively lured young talents into substance use by convincing them of their insanity, thus exerting control over them. This was the exact pattern Martin Lawrence had experienced: the mysterious medication, the psychiatric supervision, the constant suggestion that his problems were mental rather than environmental. The conspiracy deepened when Chappelle revealed what happened in that executive meeting that changed everything. According to sources close to the comedian, he was called into a room full of powerful industry figures who told him to tone down his material. They specifically had problems with his honest depiction of black people because they were conditioning and felt threatened by Dave's show. When Chappelle refused to compromise his artistic vision, they offered him $50 million to change the show. When he refused again, the pressure campaign began.
I mean, I'm a conspiracy theorist to a degree. Like when I connect dots that maybe shouldn't be connected, I don't know. But certain dots, like when I see that they put every black man in the movies in a dress at some point in their career, I'll be connecting them down like, wow, all these brothers got to wear a dress.
Chappelle's warning to Oprah was almost prophetic. He cited Mariah Carey's public breakdown as an example, suggesting he could see through the facade of the entertainment industry's mental health narratives. This was exactly what had happened to Martin Lawrence. Resist the system, get labeled crazy, disappear from public view. The most disturbing revelation came when Chappelle connected his experience to a broader pattern of industry control. He warned that when entertainers don't comply with Hollywood's agenda, they're systematically destroyed through psychological warfare. The same tactics used on Martin, isolation, medication pressure, public humiliation, were being deployed against anyone who threatened the system. What makes this conspiracy even more credible is the timing. Both Martin and Dave experienced their breakdowns at the absolute peak of their careers, when they had the most leverage and independence. Both were immediately subjected to psychiatric pressure and medication recommendations. Both fled their situations, Martin to psychiatric treatment, Dave to Africa, and both were labeled crazy by the same media machine that had celebrated them just months before. Chappelle's courage in speaking out revealed the truth that Martin Lawrence couldn't or wouldn't share. Hollywood has a systematic method for destroying entertainers who won't play by their rules. They create the stress, then offer the cure in the form of psychiatric control. They isolate their targets, then claim the isolation proves mental illness. They destroy careers, then blame the victims for being unable to handle success.
Celebrity, your realm of getting in trouble is worse than the average person. You know what I mean? Like the average dude got to go out and look for trouble. I'll be sitting around mind my own business and dude come up, hey man, you're Dave Chappelle. I'm like, yeah, what's up, man? Hey, I got 12 naked bitches in hot air.
The pattern is undeniable. The conspiracy is real. and Martin Lawrence was just the first victim brave enough to survive it. The conspiracy of silence around Martin Lawrence was about to be shattered by the one person who refused to be intimidated, medicated, or silenced. What Tisha Campbell revealed in 1997 would expose the real reason Hollywood had been so desperate to control Martin and why they failed. By 1997, the pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Martin Lawrence had survived the street breakdown, the firearm arrests, and the DV allegations. Hollywood had successfully spun each incident as isolated mental health episodes, keeping their cash cow working while his life fell apart. But there was one person who'd been watching it all unfold from the inside, and she was about to blow the whole cover-up wide open. Tisha Campbell had been Martin's on-screen wife for 5 seasons of Martin, but behind the cameras, she was witnessing something that would haunt her for decades. While the industry was busy medicating Martin and managing his breakdowns, they were ignoring the real source of his instability, a pattern of predatory behavior that was escalating with each passing month. In her federal lawsuit, Campbell didn't just accuse Martin of SH, she painted a picture of systematic A that revealed why Martin had been so paranoid, so violent, so desperate to carry weapons everywhere. He wasn't just mentally ill, he was a pred who knew his victims were getting ready to speak out.
Had also put up a post, regardless of the past or any misrepresentation of it in the press, I have nothing but love for Tisha then and now. We are good and always will be. And then he used.
The lawsuit detailed repeated and escalating SH, S battery, verbal A, and related threats. But here's what makes this even more sinister. Campbell described how Martin's behavior had become increasingly volatile, erratic, and violent as his obsession with her intensified. This wasn't random mental illness. This was the behavior of someone who knew his secrets were about to be exposed. Think about the timeline. Martin's breakdown started in July 1995, the same month his marriage began falling apart and his behavior on the Martin set became unbearable. His firearm arrest happened while he was allegedly terrorizing Campbell at work and his wife at home. The psychiatric medication and live-in nurses weren't treating mental illness. They were managing a pred who was losing control. Campbell's courage in filing the lawsuit revealed the truth that Hollywood had been desperately trying to hide. Martin's breakdowns weren't the cause of his problems, they were the result of his guilt and paranoia about being exposed. The industry hadn't been protecting a mentally ill star, they'd been enabling an S-pred because he was making them too much money to lose. The most damning evidence came from Campbell's refusal to work with Martin during the show's final season. She would only return to complete her contract if producers guaranteed she would never have to be alone with him again. Think about that. The network was so aware of Martin's dangerous behavior that they agreed to film the show's stars separately rather than lose their investment. When the case was settled out of court, Hollywood breathed a sigh of relief. They'd successfully buried another scandal, kept their star working, and maintained the fiction that Martin's problems were just mental health issues. But Campbell's lawsuit had exposed the real conspiracy. An industry willing to sacrifice women's safety to protect their profits. In 2020, when asked about the allegations, Martin dismissed them as BS, but his denial only confirmed what Campbell had been saying all along. He was a pred who never faced real consequences for his actions. The psychiatric treatment, the medication, the breakdowns, it was all just an elaborate cover-up for behavior that should have landed him in prison, not a mental health facility. At 60, Martin Lawrence's darkest secrets are finally exposed. The breakdowns, the firearms, the threats, it wasn't mental illness. It was a pred losing control while Hollywood covered it up. The man who made us laugh was hiding something far more sinister than anyone dared to imagine.